Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Trondheim Kunstmuseum and this seminar called Towards a Future Museum Glossary, A for Ability, T for Trust. My name is Johan Börjesson and I'm the director of the museum. A year and a half ago, I was contacted by a researcher at Copenhagen University who asked if the museum of Trondheim Kunstmuseum wanted to be part of a network a Nordic network for museums involved in a process of change, who were in one way or another evolving or changing form. Of course I did. Of course we did. The Museum Y network is comprised of Kiasma in Helsinki, Malmö Kunstmuseum, and Trondheim Kunstmuseum, and as well as researchers at Copenhagen University. And as we are all in processes of change, it is important for us to ask ourselves why we are doing what we are doing. And as we change into something different, we should look at what that different thing should be, and that in a sense will be an answer to the issue of why museums in our current day. Trondheim Kunstmuseum is involved right now in a very intense process of redefining ourselves, of finding our role in a possible new collaboration, a merger. In any case, it will be a new constellation with Nordenfjelske Kunstindustrimuseet. Debates are running as to which building we should occupy, and a lot of attention has been focused on specifically the idea of the museum as a building. And this makes it all the more important for those of us. The museum, yes, it is a type of building, but it is also, and more importantly, a type of activity. And those of us who work with this activity have to define what it is that we want to do and why we are doing it. And so when you are in a process of change can be daunting, change can be exciting, change can be a lot of things. But when in a process of change, you want to have someone there with you. You want to compare notes with others who have been or are in a similar situation. And also, you need to put words to this change that you're going through. And so the Museum Y and this seminar is our answers to this need. So for this seminar, which will be today and half tomorrow, we have invited a number of speakers and thinkers on various subjects that are close to our hearts and close to our minds at this point. We will be talking about how museums address art that is no longer only paintings to be hung on walls and appreciated by viewers, but art that grips into society in a more in stronger and also more subtle ways. We will be looking at the expectations of the museum as a building and possibly alternatives to those expectations. Can the museum be a network? Can the museum be many buildings, functions in other activities, and so on? We will be looking at what happens if what mustn't happen happens, if the museum burns down and there's nothing left. How can we conceive of the museum as digital fragments of what once was? And tomorrow we will also be looking at the role of the museum as something other than a collection of objects and a collection of ideas to be projected to an audience. The museum as something perhaps more open, something more dialogical. So we have a lot to do. I'm very happy to start off with Sebastian Cichocki. Was that right? So please, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me now? Yes? Okay. First of all, I have a terrible reputation for never-ending presentations, so I have to... But first of all, I'm like super excited to be here. It's, you know, how the hell is it possible? Even, you know, like I'm opening a major exhibition tomorrow, so, you know, being here, it's a little bit surreal experience, but also I haven't traveled professionally for a long time. I might be a little bit unfocused because of all those like distractors, but I will do my best. But first of all, I'm like, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. I'm enjoying the snow, your presence, company, you know, good talks. And you know, I'm also like a very passionate and stubborn producer of glossaries and lexicons. So that's probably why I'm here. And this kind of future museology is something which I've been kind of dabbling at for many years. I'm trying to kind of imagine the future of those, you know, weird devices which we invented and we kind of petrified in the 19th century. So, yeah, so I selected a few, I've selected a few kind of terms from my kind of ample folders, and I will share like 3 terms with you, and to kind of start to kind of like delineate what I've been struggling with. I will start with those images, like a kind of random Google image, museum, audience in the museum image, and Mille Laderman-Yukilis, you know, like working on her kind of land project on the Staten Island. So basically, we had like a little closed session in the morning, and I was really like, you know, it was also like very important for me to share those things and kind of my fascination with those movements, you know, because it was, as you said, it's not about buildings, it's about activities, it's about like, you know, also like gathering and, you know, sometimes, you know, moving without traveling, you know, it also happens a lot. But basically what I'm dealing with in my daily work, it's like observing, comparing, analyzing, and most of all, like supporting those movements from the museum to the kind of reality as we speak, like social, political movements, scientific centers, and so on. So I'm like super like fascinated by artists who migrated from art somewhere else. So they ended up being scientists. They ended up being like politicians, prime ministers. We know this case. Or you can observe like this kind of opposite direction movement when this box, which is very kind of, you know, rigid and disciplined and, you know, yeah, it's kind of petrified, is kind of leaking, or like it's like loses, it's kind of, you know, like the walls are like falling apart, and those activities, those movements, those phenomena are kind of, you know, sipping into the museum. So like I'm like pretty much fascinated by non-artistic kind of phenomena being taken care of actually in places which we call museums. Or like the third case is like, you know, like the, if you can recall the famous Wittgenstein's illustration, the rabbit duck figure, the mascot. This is the rabbit duck phenomenon. Of course, Wittgenstein used it, but there are like many other people who enjoyed this caricature, this actually the drawing, which was first published in the 19th century. And the rabbit duck figure, it's a very strange creature. Yeah, it's like it's both. Yeah, it's like it has like double ontology. You know, it's the rabbit and the duck, but it depends on you, like what you are putting into the very moment of looking at things and naming things and recognizing things. But the most fascinating thing is like being able to kind of flicker between both things, you know. So there are like many practices, many beautiful practices, artistic, post-artistic practices. I will come back to this term later, when something what might be recognized as worth of our museological kind of, you know, apparatus being applied to it. I mean, conserving, disseminating, cataloging, and so on. But at the same time, it's a part of something else. And I think, yeah, this is like to summarize what I'm dealing with. It's like I'm looking at the moments when art becomes a part of something else, other systems. And of course, like talking about museums, we have to take into consideration that we as humans are like facing our extinction soon. So it's like high time to kind of rethink, you know, what is our role. And we can look back, we can look at some writings, at some artworks, also like from the 20th century and earlier, telling us what to do, actually, you know. So it's more about like using what we already have instead of like producing new things, you know. Like, so it's when we talk about like those glossaries, lexicons, and so on, I would say it's much more interesting to look at things which were there, like these promises which were not fulfilled, because we are a very capricious, also like a kind of community. We like new fashions, like new tendencies, new turns in art, and so we very often like lose our interest in some like things which we should be establishing like a more like a long-term relationship. We are not very monogamous as a community. Like we like those kind of short-life affairs. Yeah, but this is all about, yeah, as conservative as it might sound from somebody who came from Poland, you know, like we are looking at monogamous relationship in curatorial work, you know, with certain communities, with certain like collectives and so on. And yeah, so before I will talk about my three examples, three terms, and during this kind of lockdown period, I really learned how to be very much down to earth, also in a literal sense, like rolling on the soil, you know, like it's not only about being concrete or to the point, but I will try to illustrate it with some like tangible examples. So we are not getting too theoretical, we are not getting too flamboyant about like catchy phrases, but it's also about like the daily, even not very sometimes exciting routine of kind of supporting certain systems, certain activities, and so on. So I would start with, before we move to those three terms, which you had at the first slide, which is the Endospore term stolen from biology, one-to-one scale stolen from many people, Lewis Carroll, Umberto Eco, Stephen Wright, you know, all those guys mainly, who use this in their like writings. And rewilding, which is kind of appropriated from as one of the you know, forms of like nature preservation kind of policies from the 90s. So I'm starting with Louis Kamnitzer because I'm very much fascinated by Louis Kamnitzer, this conceptual artist from Uruguay, and he wrote this fantastic essay, and I would like to introduce the character, the main character for our little meeting, which is the genie. Genie living in a bottle, like genie in a container, in a vase, or I don't know where genies live nowadays, in some kind of boxes, you know. But there is a fantastic essay by Kamnitzer, called "Where is the Genie?" And Kamnitzer, being like not only a fantastic conceptual artist, but also a prolific writer and educator, reformer, like he was really like reforming the art education in Uruguay. He's comparing our art system to a kind of gigantic genie research kind of gang, you know, like genie busters kind of, you know, commando. So we are like looking at vases, bottles, and so on. We have mastered the knowledge about the evolution of the forms of those containers. You know, like we know how they are like changing, you know, we know the shapes, we know the textures, we know the materials. We exhibit those boxes, those containers, those bottles in the museums. But in the end, we are all about the genie. We are all excited about the genie that lives inside, you know, like it's not about the containers. But the thing is, like, genie is invisible. Yeah, so what we can do, we can exhibit the bottle, the container, the cup, whatever, but we believe that the spirit is inside. Nobody saw him or her or them. So the problem is that genie might not exist. That would be, you know, like really disappointing end of our scenario. But to keep this metaphor going, you know, like there are like some moments in the art history and the art theory where we are trying to get rid of the boxes, when we are trying to get rid of the bottles, and we are looking at the genie, trying to look at the genie. So basically those three terms, it's like, yeah, I can apply this genie thing to those. Like in the first case, it would be like releasing the genie from the bottle. The second would be letting the genie, yeah, I will come back to it. Yeah, when we have the, yeah, I have some like crazy ideas about what genie might do. But you know, like, you know the metaphor, you know, like it's really about celebrating something which is in art, in artworks, which is not visible, which we believe it's there. So we have to create, we did it in 19th century, this apparatus of making people believe that the genie is there. So it's not only the thing which is hanging there, it's much more. It's much deeper than just looking at things. So it's a very complicated, very complex apparatus. I had a slide with how complex it is. So the scale. The first term, S is for scale 1:1. So this is a term which was kind of popularized by the Canadian theorist, writer Stephen Wright, after Lewis Carroll and his story about the adventures of Sylvie and Bruno from the 19th century. And Stephen Wright, who is also like a very kind of, you know, passionate lexicon writer, he disappeared. Like, unfortunately, you know, I really admire this guy, but he kind of vanished from my radars. He grew this gigantic Santa Claus beard and settled down, and he's like a permaculture farmer now, somewhere in a little village in France. So I lost the track of him. So he doesn't write more. I don't know, maybe this is like the kind of materialization of his ideas, like being a permaculture person. But he used this metaphor, this one-to-one thing, in his lexicon about the science of usership, the use of art, the use value of art, bringing back those this actually quite beautiful story about farmers and cartographers. You know, like this. It's a very strange book. I tried to read it, but all those like political, you know, connections, like metaphors dealing with the daily political situation in the 19th century England doesn't really speak to me, but it's still funny. And there is like a story of farmers who are like commissioning a map, like, you know, like a very precise map. They want to have like an efficient, you know, farming system. So they are very picky about like the accuracy of the map. So the cartographers are making like map, which is like, 1 to 20, like 1 to 10, 1 to 5, and so on. And the farmers are not satisfied enough. So the cartographers, they come up with this brilliant idea of creating a 1-to-1 scale map. So like every branch, every leaf, every rock is on the map, but the farmers are not happy about it. Like they say, if you unroll the map, you will block the sunlight. So it will be like disastrous for the crop. And so the cartographers, they take time, they think about it, and they come up like in the morning and they say, hey, we have an idea. Why not we use the land as a map? Let's pretend that the territory, your fields, they are the map. So everything is like 1-to-1, like it's precise. You can measure it and so on, and say yes, let's do it, and it works. It's like the most precise map on the planet. So this was, like this motif was, it kept coming back in like Umberto Eco's this essay, actually quite a beautiful essay. The impossibility of drawing a map, a 1-to-1 scale map of of something. I can't remember now. But for Stephen Wright, that was a really handy metaphor of practices which don't kind of replicate, making like copies, replicas of existing things or situations which are happening beyond this wall. So it's not. Yeah, like, it's not about like painting a landscape, it's about like, maybe like cultivating a land. But yeah, maybe it's, this example is too stupid, but maybe it's not like about like reporting on like, so some kind of political movements, but creating one. Yeah, so it's more about like being a part of something, like not doubling with this, idea of that art is about like imitating something. It's not about imitating. Maybe sometimes it's about initiating something. So there, of course, you can think about like thousands of examples. Thousands of examples. Like of practitioners who do like make like greenhouses, like cultivating something, like healing people, like establishing communes and so on and so on. And there are like many runaways. This is very interesting. People who are like educated as artists and they kind of vanished. They are doing something else, which can be, but doesn't have to be like recognized as artistic practice. And this is, I like this, maybe I'm not, it's recorded, so I cannot say it. But like Peter von Tiesenhausen is like a great example. Maybe not his practice, like generally, Canadian land artist. But what he did with his farm, I think it's like a very literal illustration for 1-to-1 scale practice. Peter lives in a countryside. And there are like, a lot of fracking going on in this area, like they're pumping oil and, gases and so on. So there's like a total kind of destruction around this area. And one of the companies decided to construct this big pipe going through his property, So actually like damaging the landscape and also like affecting the quality of his like life. So he copyrighted his land as an artwork. He said, this is a ready-made piece, like you don't build like a pipe for this painting, it's like not fair, So, so they panicked, and they started to send lawyers, and lawyers started to negotiate things with Peter, but Peter started to charge them because it was an artistic performance. So he was selling tickets before he started to sit down next to the table and so on, so they gave up. So I think it's like a really kind of nice, down-to-earth example. But just to give you like a few examples of artists which are kind of dear to me, which were part of certain programs or like which I'm kind of established like this kind of like an ongoing relationship to kind of illustrate this 1-to-1 scale paradox of using their territory as a map. maybe, for example, Bonnie Orashirk. She sadly died recently. She was like one of those like great ecofeminist heroes and a fantastic artist who, yeah, I selected this image, this early performance, which I really like. This is called Sitting Still. It's from 1970s. And I don't know if you can see, and yeah, maybe in this photo you can see it better. Yeah, she had like very modest, like tiny interventions. Like she just this gigantic puddle. It's a construction site next to a highway. Bonnie discovered this place. She fell in love with it. You know, like with all those like sticking out pieces of furniture and so on. And she came back there, and she was just, you know, like dressed beautifully, smoking cigarettes and contemplating the landscape. You know, it's like a very much kind of dark ecology moment. You know, like nature doesn't exist. You know, like it's, you know, she's contemplating something which was created by those strange creatures called Homo sapiens. You know, but at the same time, you know, she was like kind of stressing up like the surreality of the scene. And some years later, like 10 years later, she came back to the same spot, and she established something which is called the farm. So under the highway, she, you know, she settled down like a farm with a culture house, which is very important for the local punk rock scene. You know, like such bands as 7 Seconds and so on, like they had their debuts there, you know, like in this shed, you know. So, and they had animals, and they had like a kindergarten, and it was really like focused on those, like on the neighbors, like neighboring communities. So Bonnie kind of dedicated herself to this mission, you know, like of sustaining a farm in this like devastated area, like under the highway, on the outskirts of San Francisco, keeping it alive, you know, like so you can imagine what was the reaction of art institutions, you know, like they completely lost their interest, you know, like because there was always the same. Yeah, it's like the same thing, the same practice. You go to work, you have to feed animals, you have to, you know, like talk to children, you have to organize a concert, you have to like rent the equipment and so on. So yeah, I think it's like quite a good example of this kind of one-to-one scale. An example now to conclude with the one-to-one scale. I think you are like know where I'm getting now, you know. Just like a little example, I tried to add some experiments, sometimes like failed experiments from like our practice, like practice of the museum and the office for artistic service, which I'm also like a member even, you know, like it's like if you can imagine like the museum as this kind of big construction site, tangible walls, collection and so on. So the office for post-artistic service doesn't have a website, doesn't have like, you know, an email account, doesn't have anything. But it's like 300 people, you know, so it's like a community, you know, people who are delivering like artistic services to social movements. Like if you need like gigantic flags for your pro-choice demonstration tomorrow, you're like, you know, you're asking us. So this is like a kind of funny example of this kind of one-to-one thing of like recognizing what is there. Maybe it's also like a little bit too illustrative, but I kind of like the results of this thing. The Brudno Biennial. Brudno is a district in Warsaw on the other side of the river, where we settled down a kind of sculpture park 12 years ago. And a Polish artist, sculptor, and like not an activist, more like a kind of shaman kind of figure, Paweł Althammer. He wanted to have a biennial there, you know. But our idea was to do the biennial once and forever, you know. So it was like, you know, kind of trick, and so the idea was to, as we know this area, this district quite well. We have like our relationship, like a kind of solid relationship with some like communities there, and some artists and non-artists, gardeners, and so on, we decided to kind of celebrate the biennial, which consisted of venues only, not artworks by venues. So we didn't invite any artists like or Paweł and his collaborated Gorzka Matsuga, who is also like a quite established artist, like mainly British now, but she's from Poland. We had like this mission of recognizing places which might be interesting for the audience. You know, so the neighbors, like the people who lived in the Brudno district, nominated places. Like the gardening plot, an interesting balcony, a concrete slab, which is a mysterious thing, which we have no idea what is it for. And we kind of, you know, enlisted those things, and we used our museum apparatus. You know, it's very well calibrated. Yeah, you produce catalogs, you have like guided tours, you have like visual identity and everything. So we activated like the whole, apparatus. And so, yeah, and this is like the map for the biennial, you know, like you can visit those places and, for example, visit like a tourist, like a very shady, I can say that because they don't exist any longer, like a shady kind of tourist office on the top floor of one of the block of flats. And they had like an amazing view. So like actually the piece, so to speak, in the biennial was their window. So you can ring the bell, you know, like go take the lift, go to the top floor, and ask them to show the district from the top. So and we wrote text also about all those places, trying to use our, you know, like we are like, you know, kind of charged with all those theories. We can, you know, write good text about things, you know, like they don't have to be art, you know, like they are like symbols for something that might be like critical, they might be politically charged, and so on. And yeah, this was such an amazing sound piece. It was like a broken kind of vent opening. It was making this, you know, like weird sound, like randomly. Beautiful piece, like, you know, really beautiful kinetic sculpture, you know, with sound. Yeah, so I hope it's not fixed. So the only thing which we added, which we built as a museum, as the Museum of Modern Art, was we built a greenhouse. So it was the only thing which we did. But it's not an artwork, you know, so we can always, it was like kind of questioned by the municipality, why do you do it? Like, you know, how can you like justify your spendings on a greenhouse? We said because of carrots, like it grows well there, you know, like it's used by the, but it was like the requests from those local people, you know, they wanted to have a greenhouse, you know, like, so we built a greenhouse, and we also like recognize it as a venue. So in the end, it became like a conference hall, like more or less. So we had meetings there, inviting such people as the company, as Katrin Bohm, for example, this German-British artist who is doing like a lot of composting, fermenting, kind of cooking, farming stuff. So she was teaching us how to work with kombucha, you know, how to produce it, how to grow it, and so on, which was like very like popular. It was too popular for this space, you know. Yeah, so like I guess like this kind of craft of astrology, like walking around, you know, like discovering the place is kind of crucial in such situations. You know, you have those guides, you have like local artists showing us like the favorite places without really producing anything, just like mapping the place and recognizing the quality of the place, you know, like it was really entertaining. I have to say, like, for the art audience, you know, like they really like the works, they like the venues, they like the stories. So, yeah, as the last slide from this section, I will have to speed up with the next two. yeah, like this gesture of like nominating something, you know, like appropriating not only a work, like an object, but also like the whole city. It's like kind of an art historical thing, yeah. There's like this legacy, like Alex Mlynarczyk, Stanofilko, and Zita Kostrova, how they nominated Bratislava in the 60s as the artwork, you know, was quite, you know, like Claire Bishop wrote about it beautifully in her Artificial Health book, how they appropriated like the whole city for like 7 days, you know, that this is the show. So they produced posters, they calculated how many trees, dogs, cars, and you know, like buildings participating in the show, and it was between the 1st of May and the 9th of May. So, you know, heavy stuff, you know, like the parades, you know, like military parades and so on. So they claimed that whatever the photo taken during the you know, like in Bratislava between the 1st and 9th of May 1965 is an artistic documentation. Yeah, because you are like, you know, capturing the performance, which was quite, as you see, well produced, you know, like with all those soldiers and everything. The second term which I would like to share with you is rewilding. And this is, you know, one kind of tendency, you know, like in this kind of ecological restoration set of possible methods popularized by the organization called the Earth First in the 90s. So, you know, they're like some kind of misleading kind of interpretations of the term, like this old school 90s thing, you know, like this rewilding. It's somehow, you know, it doesn't work, you know, like this idea of, for example, like introducing those like big fauna to Siberia again. So like if mammoths are extinct, so why not to have like elephants there? You know, like, so this is like kind of, you know, something which is going on in South America, you know, for example, with introducing some kind of like big reptiles or mammals, but it's not about it. Like the kind of, you know, rewilding thing, like the Rewilding Europe organization proposes, it's like not doing anything. It's like stopping to do anything. You know, rewilding is about like recognizing that nature knows what to do. You know, so there's like this idea of having, yeah, actually our like Nobel's award, the Olga Tokarczuk, the writer, she advocates for leaving half of the planet inaccessible for the humans. You know, this is her mission. She always like keeps like promoting this idea that it would like keep the balance, and this is the start. You know, like this is like first half of the planet cannot be, you know, accessed by us. So this is all about like this idea of like self-regulation, you know, like it's also like a little this kind of new agey hippie idea of, you know, like the Gaia system, which is kind of calibrating itself and so on. But yeah, of course, you know, when you look at the, even during the lockdown period, you know, how the nature was kind of bouncing back, it's incredible. You know, like how I saw like in Warsaw, you know, like those meadows on the way to the museum, you know, like, you know, buzzing with insects, butterflies and everything, you know, it's quite beautiful. So this is like the concept from this kind of ecological restoration methodology, yeah? So humans are not allowed, things are happening, you know, like they are rewilding. But let's like grab this concept to our like museum work, you know, like what does it mean to like rewild a museum, you know, which is like a very well cultivated garden, yeah? It's like very well trimmed and shaped, and there are many rules in the garden, you know, like don't touch, don't do, don't run, don't pick berries, whatever. So there are rules. I just wrote down a few of them, like following this, you know, some teaching from, writing from Stephen Wright, of course, whom I mentioned, but being kind of orphaned by him as he became like this permaculture figure. I have to deal by myself with like finding more examples. But there are like, you know, those kind of regulations or like little hatches, you know, like to keep this thing in one shape, you know, like so to somehow recognize what is art, what is not, what should we protect and conserve, what should be kicked out, you know, like so it's a kind of you know, civil contract, you know, like that art is singular, you know, like it's not autonomous, you know, like we look at the thing and we know who did it. Yeah, it's like there's a label. And we celebrate this person, you know, and or there's something about like ownership or like our kind of position of looking at things and you know, not questioning things. Just it's like very Kant thing, you know, like Immanuel Kant, you know, kind of aimless, you know, this function of art. You know, it's not to function. It's not. This is not the purpose of art, you know, like to serve you. You know, it doesn't have a function. Its function, it's to be functionless. You know, so they're like the different things, but it's all leads to to keep this guy alive. Yeah, it's like, you know, to believe that the genie is there. You know, like so you know, to have the guy trapped in the bottle, which is our museum, and to make the people like admire this fact that it's not only about the oil on canvas. You know, it's much more. It's much deeper. It changes you. It's like triggers your imagination. It makes you a better person, and so on and so on. So there are like many tools, like those scissors and knives, to make it neat and disciplined and so on. So it doesn't have to do a lot with rewilding. And I guess there are many artists, you know, many practitioners who can really rewild the system and make it rock. You know, like I think John Latham was one of them. You know, like I really admire this guy, and also like Barbara Steveni and what they achieved as the APG, as the artist placement group. I think it was really about rewilding this system. So for those who are not that familiar with the APG, it was a kind of enterprise, a kind of cooperative established in the 60s for artists to be placed in non-artistic environments. So they were paid to be so-called incidental person in hospitals, banks, you know, TV programs, you know, like radio channels. They were even embarking on like those whaling ships. You know, like, so one of the artists, he did some crazy statues on the ship being bored, and he, with all those fishermen, they were like very like enthusiastic about making those statues and throwing them to the water. You know, it's like there are crazy story about those placements, you know, how they resulted. But it was all about, now it sounds like super neoliberal, you know, from our perspective, but it was like this idea, this belief that artists and their creative forces might change their working environment. You know, so those artists who were placed, for example, in a bank, you know, like they changes the maybe bank is not the best thing, but the town hall, for example, they can change the way things are being solved. You know, so they are like provide you with crazy ideas. You know, when you are stuck, you know, with those solutions. So they are those creatures, you know, like messing around, you know, like doing sometimes silly things, but also you can get there. You can get somewhere with them, you know, following them. So it was not about, they had like salaries, like decent salaries for not doing artworks. You know, they are not supposed to do an artwork. Of course they did, you know, like, but some of them. So I just wanted to, so this is kind of like a rewilding thing in terms of like, you know, putting a plant, you know, letting the plant grow somewhere else, you know, like in other, you know, like habitats, you know, like a hospital might be such a place. It's not only about like, you know, this kind of white cube situation when you cannot touch, you cannot do anything, but maybe, you know, a surgery room is a place for artwork, for video art installation, you know. some, I don't know, pipilotirist kind of thing when you are being operated. Might help. You know, like the guys from TAC, this institution in Amsterdam, they had like a proper research about those kind of pain-killing kind of, you know, forces of art. And they compared even like a placebo, like a fake artwork. Yeah, we are not getting, it's not about those places. So, yeah, I don't know why I put so many images of APG gatherings, but I really like this period. Yeah, because of John Latham. Yeah, John Latham, one of the founders of the APG group, had like this commission by the town hall from Edinburgh in Scotland, and they had to do something with those like coal mining heaps, but they are like old mining heaps. They are called Five Sisters, like by the locals. And they are from the 19th century. They are like very primitive kind of, you know, heaps of things. I guess sludge or something. And so there was like an idea of doing something artistic with them. You know, like making like this, I don't know, Edinburgh sign or, you know, or whatever, or removing them. You know, so John Latham was employed there. He was like going to the office, you know, like and discussing it, making those how do you call them? Like the studies on like possibility of like removing, adding something, and so on. So he came up with an idea. He did it like kind of secretly. He enlisted them as a heritage site, you know, so they cannot be touched. So I think it's a brilliant idea, you know, like this is environment for many endemic species of insects and birds, because they really like this. It's like it's there since the like 19th century. It's like totally perfect for many creatures, you know. So it's a beautiful artwork. Yeah, it's like changing the legal status of the thing to let them like rewild, grow, be there. You know, so yeah, this is an example. And yeah, so they're like examples of practitioners such as Oho Group, for example, the Slovenian collective, conceptual art slash land art slash I don't know what escapology kind of practice. Artists who were doing like less and less and less, you know, like it was like even their like land art practice was more about like subtly like changing the position of the, you know, of the plants with like a little string for a second, you know, not to really interrupt it, disturb it, and creating those like super complicated charts, you know, like this kind of cosmology, like those theories, diagrams, and so on. Being so interesting, like being such an amazing group of people that they were like invited to be part of this famous, legendary information exhibition at MoMA. And this invitation kind of made them paralyzed, you know, so they decided to establish a summer school to prepare, you know, like to discuss, you know, what might be done. And they vanished. They established a hippie commune called Sempas family. And yeah, and you know, and I recently managed to get like the archives of one of the photographers who visited them back then in the 70s, like 1970. And this is just amazing, you know, like you see how art is a part of something else, you know, like they have like beehives, they milk goats, and they paint, they do installations, they make like those fantastic environmental pieces. They do something which is called lithopuncture. It's an acupuncture for the planet. So they kind of track down the sick places and they put a rock on it to heal it, you know. Like so Ojo was really fantastic. You know, it didn't survive a long time. The commune, like only one family is still there, but the way they were like kind of combining conceptual art, yoga, breathing exercises, and you know, painting and so on, and also how everybody was involved in it. You know, like there are beautiful photos of them, like the Sempas family installing a show in Zagreb, So children are doing it as well, you know, like everybody is doing it, you know, like it's like this massive installation, quite beautiful actually. So yeah, I really have to speed up now. So just like a few shots of things which we are doing now, which is also about kind of APG kind of thing. This is about like placing art exhibitions, like contemporary exhibitions at primary schools. So this is what is happening now and which will be happening for the next few months. We delivered this box to 10 schools, like in small places, in small villages. And the box is full of like surprises, full of really nice artworks, delivered by such artists as Sharon Lockhart or like Slavs and Tatars collective. This is Gorzka Matsuga. It's like your propaganda set with pronouns and some like verbs and nouns like climate, like crisis. So you can do your like concrete poetry thing. You know, like you can stamp it on the benches in your classroom. You can do like a little banner and you put it in your like next to your teacher's desk and so on. So so this is a box with new commissions, new artworks, which are not tangible very often. They are very also like sets of choreographies, performances, and so on. So we have like people working with us, like Alicja Cichocki, who is like a hardcore eco-feminist fighter and dancer, and Alicja helps to animate those scores and protocols which are to be performed. Yeah, this is like warning me that I really have to. Yeah, it doesn't stop, it's annoying. Yeah, so just like, I know I have to finalize. So the Endospore is like the final thing. I will try to compress it to like, let's say 4 minutes. The Endospore is a biological term. It's the kind of form of a bacteria, of a mushroom, which is created in the very harsh conditions. You know, you have like those extreme temperatures. You have like, you know, the lack of food is also like a obvious thing. And to create this like form which is non-productive, so it doesn't breed, it doesn't like grow, it's there, it stays there and waits. You know, like until, you know, some like good things happen to it, to the environment, for example. So it might stay long. I was like just talking to Stephanie last night that on the way to Trondheim, I read about this endospore which survived in a piece of amber, and there was like an insect, like a dead fly inside, and inside the dead fly there was like the spore of a bacteria, and it was like 65 million years old, and they managed to revive it. Like they cracked the amber piece, and it lived, and it was so disappointing because it was the same bacteria which lives in the same place now, so it didn't change. So it's like the same boring species, you know. So okay. So I guess, of course, you know, like there are moments when you know, when museums creating those endospores, you know, when they don't produce, when they become something else. And in this coalition, of course, I should say something about Ernst Fischer and his like gesture of like opening the Malmö Kunstmuseum to refugees, to former concentration camp prisoners, mainly like Polish women who were imprisoned in the Ravensbrück camp. So, so this is like a beautiful example, one of the most striking examples of you know, changing the function of the museum, you know. So you have people like settling down there, you know, sleeping there, cooking in a museum, you know, and this is like a civic duty of a museum director to open it to refugees. And it's also connected, I know that my time is like, yeah, so I will not dive into it, but Maja Berezowska, one of the Polish artists, was there because of her caricatures of Adolf Hitler, which were published, you know, in the 30s in one of the French newspapers. So she was like tracked down by the Nazis, put in a concentration camp in Ravensbrück, and she ended up in Malmö, you know, leaving quite a few drawings there, but it's also like, you know, quite a striking example, you know, like how those like artistic biographies, and like this museology, this critical museology was kind of merging, what might be done with the collection of Maya, how it was used, how those drawings were used during our anti-fascist exhibition, which was, of course, definitely like connected to the current political situation in Poland. And there are many. I promise it was not like intentional to pick up examples from this region, but I guess I ticked Sweden, Norway, and Denmark already. Palle Nielsen, a Danish anarchist and architect, whose archive I've been working with now. He created this better than me, but his exhibition for the Moderna Museet, this playground, this so-called junk playground, was also quite a statement of like rewilding, but at the same like creating this kind of non-productive safety space for children. Yeah, it was like invaded by children. They were not producing artworks; they were just having fun. Yeah, massively, with this heavy, sound system, with those like vinyl records, music, a lot of like showing and cutting and hammering stuff, building red communist flags and so on. So it was really something. But there are many examples nowadays when the museums are just like kind of, stopping their programs, and this is like an obvious example, like what we did during the lockdown period, how such places as Queen's Museum became like food banks. They were distributing like, food among like neighbors. And so I guess this is also like a really interesting moment to see at the museums as sanctuaries, as Laura Rajkowicz, she defined in her book like this legal status of a museum as a sanctuary, literally, like in the Middle Ages, you're like an assassin or somebody, like running away and hiding in a church, because this is a sanctuary, so you cannot be arrested, you cannot be punished, you cannot be killed there. So facing like the refugee crisis now on the Polish-Belarusian border, like declaring that the museum is a sanctuary, it's something. Cities are becoming sanctuaries. There are like many American cities and Canadian cities where, for example, a person which is like arrested for like speeding up on a highway, and all of a sudden it becomes clear that this person doesn't have like proper papers for living in the city. It's not reported, so it's, you can get a fine for like speeding up, but this is not, you are not ending up in some kind of like detention center. A few images which I added to after our conversation last evening is related to, I'm skipping Mile Laderman-Yukilis. It's a beautiful Rashitarin. It's also beautiful. It's fantastic. There are really people who can trigger our imagination, what might be done to institutions, how they can function. But Anna Lawrence Halprin, yes, of course, yes. They are just his art historical examples, But this is like contemporary to finish. This is kind of our way of dealing with this kind of endospore concept, like dealing with those like, troubled, communities and, our friends, comrades, activists who are like close to the museum or close to our like office for post-artistic services. Last year, we decided to kind of appropriate this idea from Jerzy Ludwiński. He was a Polish theorist. Now I have to explain this post-artistic thing. He was the guy who labeled it like post-art, post-artistic, like in the 70s, which sounds like a little bit too fancy, but it's very much also like very down-to-earth thing. Like Ludwiński was observing what was happening in the art systems, and he was just, saying, probably it's not art any longer. It's not something, it's not the same bottle with the same genie which we had, like probably genie moved somewhere, He lives in a different box, you know, he lives in this kindergarten or something, and we are doing, we even don't care about the bottles any longer, you know, like I don't know, it's not fun to dust them off anyway, you know, so Ludwinski was writing beautifully, like in a very kind of, you know, he was a good writer, you know, like with all those, like, you know, literary and kind of, you know, metaphors, allegories, and so on. It's a little bit of science fiction art theory that probably we shouldn't really worry also about not being able to name it our practice, our like daily job, you know. This is like much more powerful what we do, you know, like, so we shouldn't worry, whatever it is, you know, like, so post art for him is, I know, you know, post is a very problematic prefix in the language, yeah, because it kind of implies that maybe something is over, but it's not, you know, like post-internet wasn't about like the end of internet, you know, like, post-modernism might be like us modernism might be much more modernist than, you know, modernism, you know, so it was more about like doing something, having this legacy, this experience, those competences and skills of doing art, looking at art, analyzing art, and so on. So thinking about it, we organized this summer a post-artistic congress, you know, like, so taking care of all those people who were like on the streets for those years, you know, like last years, exhausted, you know, like really fed up with those, you know, front lines, you know, abortion rights, you know, like climate crisis, you know, judicial system, refugee crisis, so on. So we created this kind of environment, this kind of summer camp very much in the Ojo collective style of like briefing together, like cooking together, having those lectures in those places, also like talks, because this is a congress, so we had some delegates like delivering those speeches. This is Agnieszka Tarasiuk talking about a menopause, you know, like, which is also like the other thing to be put in the lexicon, you know, like a menopause is a very timely metaphor for like a post-productive period, which might be also applied to institutions. It's Agnieszka, like, she really killed it, you know, like this was like the most amazing term which we had, you know, for her as a practitioner, as a woman of certain age, and it was just, you know, we had the vocabulary to talk about it, you know. And yeah, so there are just like images to give you like an impression of a kind of Endospore kind of moment. So we have, for example, like the hunting platforms which we found, which were not modified. They were just recognized as deep listening platforms, you know. And those hunting platforms on a very strange height, so you can really listen to those sounds. They are really amplified. And it also requires, like, of course, shifts in the kitchen, because we had like more than 200 people and we have to feed them. So it was also about like sharing our like cooking skills and competences and serving it. Yeah, and the last image I will not explain, but I encourage you to read about cow tools as a kind of, I don't know, maybe as a topic for the next kind of gathering, cow tools. You know? Thank you so much.
So while waiting for the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw to open in 2023, we can read up on cow tools. Yes. And you've really built our expectations about what will go on and what will be the nature of the museum. Now we're running a little bit behind schedule, but you're only here today. So does anyone have questions for Sebastian? Yes. Okay. So thank you so much for an enlightening and
nobody
inspiring.
Nobody is interested into cow tools? Okay. Like nobody wants to ask this question.
So Sebastian, what are cow tools?
It's like the most infamous like satirical cartoon which was published in the history of humankind. It was published in the 90s. I don't remember the name of the guy, but he was
Gary
kind of
Larson?
like, yeah. So people were really sending tons of letters, tons of like, you know, like angry letters, not understanding the joke. So they didn't get it, and they were like infuriated, you know. And you know, there is something strange about the soul, yeah, because we recognize the soul, and it was the mistake. We were like misled to think that this is the soul, so we have to like solve the riddle with those two. And it makes people frustrated, you know, like so of course, you know, like it's only a joke, but when you think about Alva Noe, which we touched upon a little in the morning, and his Strange Tools book, I think is a perfect illustration what art might be. You know, it doesn't have to be understood, but it works. You know, it makes you frustrated, it makes you motivated, and so on. But there is no story behind it. You know? Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we are, as I said, running behind schedule, and if anyone wants to pick up snacks or anything that are in the back of the room, the next speaker is Steffen Wellinger, who is a professor of architecture here at NTNU, Trondheim University. And so, well, do you need time to set up?
No, I can find it for you. No, it's in there.
Spiller du fra den, eller har du kopiert over til? It's kind of the concept of strange making, for me at least. Johan, in your introduction you talked about it's not about buildings, it's about activities, or maybe both. But as an architect, of course, I will talk a lot about the buildings. But this is not my presentation. But of course we can... yeah, we can talk about that as well, but I would like to start with the disclaimer. This one is looking good. As you can see in the program, I got this brownish color. So the disclaimer, I will talk about buildings, of course, but I try to relate it a bit to discussion, but maybe not to Sebastian's very interesting discussions, but I will talk about buildings in the relation of not the national museums and the largest institutions, but maybe on a different scale of the mid-size institutions. And I will start a bit, elaborate on networks, and after a while I will talk about the physical networks. But I think it's quite interesting to look at the intention of your network and the network seminar here, which is to create museums that are better, more inclusive. And all these nice intentions, I think it's a very good background for the discussion about the next museum or the future of the museum. But networks, I mean, in the last couple of years, we all have perceived art through the digital networks, the global digital networks, and I have used it a lot, quite a lot, because we use art in the teaching of our architecture students as well. This is the Digital Museum, of course, Norwegian-Swedish platform. It's a very important network, and I really acknowledge the efforts you all have been doing to give us art experience during the pandemic. This is a local exhibition which I was following from home, and it was really interesting to think about the meaning of the object and of art and the building in this context, especially for me as an architect, when you suddenly had the spaces and not only the art pieces, when you had the spaces at your home office. And of course, the single artifacts. This is Fjelltopper. You have it in your collection, Kaiseros painting. I will come back to it a bit later. But I think this pandemic, gave us new inputs about the discussion of the networks. But at the end of the day, as an architect and maybe as well as a human being, I like the physical networks. And this museum is part of a very strong physical network. The museums in, well, is it now South Trøndelag or Trøndelag? But at least a network of many museums. And I think that's quite interesting how you and this network of different physical localities share, now you share the administration, you share I'm quite sure you share economic systems and all this kind of structures, but I think you share a lot of other discussions as well through this very physical network, and of course it's an organizational network as well. In this network you share, as I was into, so it brings me to the next point in my short talk, and I will keep it a bit shorter so that we'll have a break afterwards. It's about sharing. What is the potential of sharing in this physical world, which I'm talking about? Not only about the digital world, but the physical world. And one example is about the space-object dilemma. I'm quite sure many of you are very familiar with. This is not from my talk, but it's from by Ida de Haan a couple of years ago. And you see how many % of your collections are exhibited. I don't know what is the number of your museum here, but it's maybe somewhere in between 2 and 20%. It's about 2, yes. And of course, but it's quite interesting that this is the new National Museum, the largest institution we have in this country. And they have 400,000 objects, 2% exhibited in the new museum. And that's quite interesting. I think that is quite interesting in this discussion about what could we share and how could we use this as an entrance to maybe to develop new ways of showing our collections. And I'm quite sure that many of you are very familiar with the art city Basel or Bale, which is the city of the oldest municipal art collection and a lot of museums. And of course, we all travel to this fantastic city and enjoy the exhibitions there. But I'm more interested about the precondition of having the old museum there. And having this extension here. And I think the precondition which makes this possible is this. And has somebody of you visited the Schaulager? You have visited. As a professional or as a public? As a professional, yeah. And I think this is a very interesting example of kind of different concept and the reconceptualization of the challenges of the museum and this space-object dilemma. And to make it short, I mean, you know, this is in a way the home of the art. This is the storage where the art lives, but it's accessible. And so we have temporary exhibitions here, and you as a researcher or as a professional, you can go there and study the art and visit the art at home, where the art lives, where the art stays. And I think that's a very interesting concept. I think it's Schaulage. It's almost 20 years ago it opened. Yes, 2003, and only 3 weeks ago this one opened in Rotterdam. Don't care about the form of it and all these kind of things. I think it's not very important in this context. But what I think is quite interesting is to discuss how the art is displayed, and it's the storage of the art, of the collection. That's how the collection lives, and maybe it's curated. I think it's curated, but it looks like it should not be curated. But it's not only about the collection, but it is as well about the workshops. And I think it's quite interesting how they added, in a way, a new dimension of the art experience, as well for us as public, but as well as for you as the museum world. So, just as a potential idea, I would like to present a project done by two of my students, Sverre Ausnes and Christian Østervik. And they grabbed this idea of this space-object dilemma in the museum and said, okay, what could we contribute to this discussion? And it was the Lade Kunstmagasin. And Lade is one of the most commercial areas. It's an old, airport from before the Second World War and the Second World War, and the airstrip down here, and it's a lot of commercial and not very interesting buildings at Lade at the time being. But what is interesting is that, I mean, we all know this with the internet shopping coming, and Amazon maybe is coming soon to Norway as well. We see that there's a decay of these areas as well, and it will be, at least in the near future. And this is how Lade shopping area looks like today, parts of it. And maybe not in the Black Week and Black Friday, but before and after. This was the situation the students met a year ago. So their proposal was just to move, kind of establish a similar concept to the Schaulage in Bale in one of these shopping centers. Because shopping will decline, the area for shopping will decline, but your collections, they will always grow. I mean, you collect and buy and get more funding maybe. And so this is one of the ideas they developed, and so this is the idea then over time when shopping areas are declining, you just fill it up with art. And for those of you who are familiar with Norwegian brands, this is Biltema, or Swedish brands, there is pharmacy and all these kind of things combined with art and the collection. So I think it was a very interesting concept, and here we come back to Fjelltopper, the painting in the museum context, in the shopping mall, and somehow it brings back this discussion to Duchamp when the everyday object moves into the museum, and now the museum moves into the everyday world. And I think it could be very interesting, at least if Sebastian could elaborate on it, and with all his knowledge, I think it could be quite interesting to discuss the democratic value of moving art back, or bringing art out in a shopping mall, and recontextualize art in that way. But as I said in the disclaimer, I'm an architect, not an art theorist. But this brings me to the next discussion. It's the P for the proximity, or even maybe better, the P for the publicness. Because I think, for me at least, as a user and visitor of art museums and galleries, it's very important to have access and accessibility to the art. And probably you are familiar with Nolly's map of Rome, where you can see the black, where the black is the privatized space and the white is the public space. And it's not only about the public, what we often perceive as the public spaces, the outdoor spaces. There are a lot of churches and other spaces which are public accessible. And these white spots, all the white spots are the public sphere or the public or urban fabric of Rome at 1748. So I think it's quite interesting then to think a bit about what kind of white spots do we have now in our cities. I mean, we have the public spaces, and it's snowing, it's raining, and we have all these challenges at 63 degrees north. But then we have the commercial spaces, but then we have maybe only the libraries left, which are the non-commercial public spaces, and they are climatized spaces, not the outer spaces. And I think it could be quite interesting to think a bit about how could Ray Oldenburg's sociologist concept of third places, also the home away from home, be extended to the museums and to the art world. So that it's not only the libraries who are the home away from home, the third place, as he calls it. I mean, this is the Dijkman Library, and I just said in the disclaimer, I'm not talking about the big institutions, but this is a very, very interesting building because it really works as the third place in Oslo, together with the network of all the other libraries. So, could museums be part of a network or establish a network of third places together with libraries and other places? And it's very important, it should not be commercial. I mean, we have third places which you perceive as home away from home, like cafes and these kind of things, but they're always commercial. So I'm talking about the non-commercial places. So what if this institution, together with the new sibling, sister, and the new cousin in town, and all these other art institutions, and now I'm talking about a very local situation in Trondheim, could be the network of third places. Well, it already is, maybe, but it could be developed further. And then there comes a game changer into it when we are looking at the local perspective as well. This is the new campus project. I mean, we're just sitting here somewhere, and the Trondheim University is relocating the university center from Dragvoll, and as part of it, art, architecture, music, and art history is moving down here. So it's only a couple of 100 meters on the other side of the river, which I think it's quite interesting. I mean, and in the New European Bauhaus, they state that they want to design future ways of living at the crossroads between art, culture, and science. And there is a lot of science here, but there is not much art and there's not much culture. So we need the art in this. So my proposal for the local context, but maybe could be applied for in other contexts as well, but for the local Trondheim context is to map what kind of spaces do we have today, what kind of possibilities and potentials we have, and what maybe do we lack. And then we don't replace, but we add what we lack, instead of replacing and building up new institutions. And I think that's I will come back to it a bit later, but I think it's a much more concept. The concept is much more adapted to what we see in 2021. These big institutions maybe belong to another time, at least as I see it. So, and you maybe will answer, okay, this is a nice idea, but it's so difficult to get funding for operational cost and all these extra costs we have for this kind of networks where we have to transport to Gråmølna, and we know all these discussions, at least the local discussions. We have to keep open Gråmølna at the same time as the main building. But I think we have to rethink how we think about economy in this context. This building costs about 2.7 billion Norwegian crowns. And operational costs are 3 times higher than the operational costs in this building. And then we leave this building behind, and we have still operational costs in this building. This is about economy. This building produces approximately 8 to 10 million kilos of CO2 in the normal lifetime of 60 years. So we talk a lot about ecology, and I think it was really interesting to follow Sebastian's talk as well. But could we really talk about ecology in a building that produces 8 million kilos CO2? So I would like to have a bit more time than a couple of days to prepare for this kind of discussion with you, but now I'm very concrete. And so I think we should think together and develop new narratives. This is a very concrete example. We have heard for many years that it's not possible to ban the trucks from the city centers because you have to have waste management and delivery and all these kind of things. But then a couple of years ago in 2016, somebody in Stockholm said, yes, let's try. And it works. They use these electric bikes and some electric cars, and it's a new narrative for how we can run the city infrastructure. So, as I said, I would like to have a couple of more days to think about it, but my point is with this is I think one possible concept could be, of course we can apply for funding for a billion crowns and build this fantastic new museum, and all architects will be happy, and there will be an architect competition, and we will get a lot of interesting discussions. Okay, I forgot one point about the Munch Museum. The cost of the building were 2.7 billion crowns. But if you take into account all the discussions in the Oslo municipality for years and years and years, and all the costs for this, if we could invest that in discussions about art and our common future, instead of discussing a building. It may be a bit strange that an architect says that, but my point is, with this kind of network thinking, and if we could build up a new narrative about distributed responsibility, maybe collective intelligence is the outcome of this new thinking. So, I don't know, we still have some minutes left, but I'm actually here to learn. So, it's not about museums why, but museum buildings why. I would like you to discuss a bit with your neighbor, and we take 1 minute, and then maybe we find some good answers to that. Please. Sorry, you can proceed if you want to. But apologize about my cheap trick to conclude my talk, but please. But yeah, you need the microphone maybe.
Okay, so for the streaming, we need to use the microphone. Who wants to start?
Yes, thank you for the question. We were discussing over here that there's an important component to this desire of making new, grand, fancy buildings, which has to do with the way in which urban regeneration functions today, that you didn't talk so much about, but maybe you would want to comment on that as well, because what we were talking about is that there's a strong incentive for cities today to make buildings that somehow promote the city, and it's part of a cultural policy strategy that has been very dominating all since the 19th and the Bilbao phenomenon and so on. So how do you think about this distributed network that you're suggesting is also not a very kind of spectacular way of thinking about museums? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. I expected that question. And of course, as I said, it's since the 90s the prevailing concept of using, I would like to call it using the institutions and urban development. And I think what is coming back to how Johan introduced the seminar is if you really need the big building to make art relevant, then I think we have a challenge. And of course, I mean, the Munch Museum in Oslo, it will work. It will be a fantastic. I haven't been there, so no verdict from my side on the architecture. But it will work because I mean, already now I think they have 120,000 visitors in 1 month or something. It will work as this kind of concept. But I think and that's why I didn't talk about the big national institutions. I think for the mid-sized cities, if for the relevance of art, it's much more important how the art works in everyday life instead of this kind of international Florida tourist approach where you use art as a marketing tool. But I don't have a very good answer, so that's why I would like to elaborate a bit on that in a couple of years. Then we can maybe come back to that. But I think we have to rethink, especially on the umbrella of ecology. We can't think anymore about building us out of the ecological challenge we have. And that's not only for the art world. I mean, I showed you this new project for the NTNU campus. It's a big problem for us. I mean, we leave one of the best campuses in Scandinavia behind, and we build a campus where we have CO2 emissions in the amount of 10,000 plane travels from Oslo to Trondheim annually. Is this right? And we talk about sustainable, a lot about the sustainable university and this kind of thing. So I don't think it should be anymore a question if we should or not. I mean, for me, it's more like how could we develop the museums and the art as a relevant tool for the narratives of the future without building these symbols. But that's my speculations. That's why I call this talk for speculations. But
anyone else? Well, we talked a little bit also about, I mean, this is diverging off to a slightly different topic, but this notion of third spaces, of course, is very interesting and is in many ways, and I'm sure that the Kunsthalle and we would agree that this is what we would like to be. And we look enviously at libraries who don't have to charge admission and can be a form of second living room. When it comes to museums, we are in a way encumbered by the fact that we have these sensitive and valuable objects that we have to somehow preserve also. So we will always be a slightly stiffer third space where you can't run around quite as much as in Palle Nilsson's exhibition. But at the same time, we want these spaces to be non-commercial spaces. We want them to be comfortable in the way that activities, say commercial activities that people are used to, that people associate with leisure time, are comfortable. But at the same time, we want to bring something else to that. And I would say that what is most logical and most economical to bring to that is the residue of the old museum. And to an extent, this is also what people expect to meet here. And this can be a kind of security, give a kind of feeling of security to the visitors. So I'm all for trying a new Trondheim model for museums with less building and a more economic use of the buildings. But again, who will explain this? Who will front this?
So many intelligent people here in the space. I mean, you work on narratives much more than I. As an architect, we work on very physical and concrete structures, but you work with narratives.
We should get together.
Yeah. Okay, now we're running short of time, maybe, or is there some? Yeah.
We are just discussing here about the difficulty to defend building new things for new buildings for museums, especially in places like as you said, mid-sized cities. It's more and more difficult to defend that, and it has to be very utilitarian first. As you said, Johan, collection, the need for the collection, the need for preservation, but then also I saw this postcard a bit earlier here in the museum with a question: do you want to live temporarily or permanently? And it's also, maybe we should also ask this question about the collections. How permanently is permanently? And how maybe it's an idea to just keep the size of the collection, and then you buy new things, and then you see what you do with other things, maybe that you have to, I don't know, how further you have to go with all these things, how do you say, immortal this art should be, or could be. So maybe this is also a thing, and it's one of the questions that we had in one of our works is maybe related with this. Is it high time to cut eternal from the notion of growth? So growth doesn't have to be eternal. It can be also degrowth, or maybe very, very, very small steps of growth and the organic, very organic. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I will maybe have a closer look at the recording afterwards so that I really will remember. But this was my take on it before we had this little chat and before I saw Sebastian's presentation. And I think what is quite important that buildings should have an added value. It's not only about being, the shell of the content. And the third place discussion could be, okay, of course you have to have this, or you have to deal with the expectation of this is a museum, have valuable objects and all these kind of things, but you can still break down or build down the threshold to enter this space. I'm here a couple of times when you have an exhibition, which lasts for a couple of months. But so how could I be invited into your building every day? This kind of things. Sharing, we were into it. And then loose fit is in a way what you're discussing with elasticity. It could be, in periods it should be a bit bigger, and some other periods maybe you shrink. So loose fit is a concept we use in the urban discussions about not being too precise, and it's about as well about discussions about resilience for the future. Elasticity could be bigger, shrink as well. Urban, accessible, and then rhizomatic. You probably know the concept. Johan brought this in when we discussed my talk in advance, and I think it's in a way a more sophisticated way of discussing the network structure, and it could be quite interesting to look a bit further into it. But just to come back to the Trondheim situation, you wish to create museums that are better, more inclusive, and have relevance to a broader section of the publics they intend to serve. And you have to take a decision, you from Trondheim, where? And I think it will be quite interesting to follow your decision, and I'm very curious. No pressure, no, but I'm very curious, but I think what maybe could be the backdrop for your decision is this, as we have discussed it, and maybe as well a discussion about what this plus could be. It's not about not building, it's not about not creating new spaces, but maybe about discussing what we are missing. So thank you. The only thing I missed today is proper parking for my bike, but
it's in the budget for next year.
Okay, so I come back then. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any? Do we have time for more questions, or do we have more questions?
It was just, well, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Would you mind just going back to the project that you presented with the beloved city? Just if you would add a few words to that. I didn't really, or will you just explain it again, please? Just, I didn't really get what it was about.
No, it's still there. The beloved city, it was not very metaphoric reference. It's very concrete. For us in urban planning, it has always been a big challenge with delivery and waste management. One of the biggest challenges. And nobody had a solution for that. Until somebody in Stockholm actually built up a narrative around that this might be possible with a hub, which is this, and a distributed network where you could just simply use electric bikes like this one. This was more an invitation to maybe reconceptualize our thinking about the networks and how difficult they are. Because now suddenly they told us, and in this beloved city project, they tell us that it's not that difficult as we have assumed for many years, and it even gives an added value to the city, because everybody likes to see the electric bike delivering things in the city and taking the trash with it. Right. So that was not very metaphoric, but very concrete example of building up a new narrative.
Yeah, but it can be very useful with the concrete example.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Steffen. No, did we have a break planned here? Yes. And yeah, a break to mingle with the microphone off.